He's back! Welcome back to Tide Pod. We deviated from our regularly scheduled programming. Of course, first of all, introducing ourselves. It's Jack Knowlton and Tony Sakalas, your favorite two writers from Tide Illustrated. We deviated a little bit from our normal course of action of uploading on Wednesdays because we had to wait to drop this news. And it's, of course, the news that every Alabama fan has been waiting for on the basketball front. And that, of course, Tony, is that Mark Sears is back. Mark Sears withdrew his name from the NBA draft here on Wednesday. You have the Final Four shirt on, very fitting. Well done with the wardrobe. Obviously, Sears was the best player on that Final Four team, averaged over 20 points per game, 21 and a half to be specific. Second team All-American, first team All-SEC, already, putting his name as one of the best players in Alabama history, and may just etch his name solely in that category if he can now lead Alabama back to what they were doing with a better roster here next season. There's a ton to dive into, Tony, but first of all, your reactions on just how big of news this is. I think everyone kind of understands that already, but Mark Sears is back. Will be back for Alabama next season with this loaded roster.
Yeah, I feel like we have to get like sirens or something in the pod in the opener. Maybe we'll do that in post, just like blaring emergency, Exactly. I think Alabama is going to be the number one team, the number one preseason team. I think they have the strongest roster. I've said that for a while, projecting that this would happen. So I'm not going to be.
Oh, hold up! I'm gonna interrupt you for a minute.
Do we have a solid?
I haven't exactly that. Mark Sears.
There we go.
There you go.
Yeah.
You were saying this is
so that I feel like that gives us a little bit more But yeah, no, I think that Alabama is going to be the number one preseason team. I think they've got the strongest roster. They've got a really good mix of experience and youth, and then all of it is talented. We're still waiting. It depends on when you're hearing this pod. We'll probably have a decision, but we're still waiting on Jaron Stevenson's decision. But we just jumped on it. Had to do an emergency pod for Mark Sears. Regardless of the Stevenson decision, I still stand by my statement that Alabama will have the number one roster. Obviously, Stevenson would be a great benefit to that as well. But I just think Alabama is incredibly deep, 1-13. I guess 1-12 if Jaron Stevenson doesn't come back. But you look at this roster and it's the best one that Alabama's ever assembled. And the expectation, Jack, is national title. I don't think Alabama's really ever been able to start a season with that. But I think that you look at this team and you really got to expect a national title. You got to kind of look at it the way you looked at some of those Nick Saban teams on the football field. It's like national title or bust. I know it's going to be a lot of pressure. And that's one of the only things that I think it's kind of concerning about this team because, on paper, it's so good that this team is going to be playing with a great deal of pressure. That's the only concern I have about it because, when you look at all the basketball reasons, there's really few holes on this team. They answered a lot of holes from last year. They reinforced. They can shoot the lights out of the ball. I just think it's a really exciting time for Alabama basketball.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned that with the expectations. I mean, I think it's pretty safe to say this is going to be the most highly anticipated season in the school's history, and it feels like a lot of those seasons the seasons behind that have been highly anticipated have come pretty recently. You have a year with Brandon Miller, one of the best recruits. That team goes out and creates Final Four expectations for itself. You have last season's team, which going into the postseason, I think it's safe to say not a lot of people were banking on them to reach the Final Four. And then you do it, and then you go out and reload the way you do, like you mentioned with the 1-13. Just depth. I completely agree with you that this is the best roster in college basketball. I think, I wouldn't get deterred. Like everyone has to understand that the AP poll is a very arbitrary thing. Whichever team gets ranked first, that doesn't matter. What matters is what Tony said, which is where this team could reach. But I mean, Mark Sears, you talk about the jewel on the crown. I think him specifically, there was a lot of NBA draft buzz for him. And you and I have talked about this a couple times where it's interesting if you're an Alabama fan where you're subtly rooting against a player you want to, of course, see succeed and see achieve his dreams. And I think at least I know our subscribers are very kind to say, of course, Mark Sears, if you think you can realize your dream, go for it. But I think most fans are certainly happy to see him back and to see him, likely etch his name as the greatest player this program has ever had pass through it. Coming from the transfer portal, no less, having to navigate that route as well.
Yeah, I don't think he's gonna reach the all-time points record. He would have to have just he's just not going to be able to reach it. But I think he'll probably, with another season like last year, he could reach up, I think, to number 2. I looked at it yesterday. But I think when you look at the Final Four run, if he makes another Final Four run this season, the points that he's, scored, the way he shot the ball, the difference he's made, I think that, he will go down as the greatest player in program history by the time he leaves. And really, though, I think he's going to be kind of the face of a new era of Alabama basketball. I mean, you kind of look at and I hate to keep on, this is a basketball pod. I hate to keep on going back to the football field, but, you look at it like a Julio Jones or a Mark Ingram and just how much impact they made to the early Saban era. I think that's what you're going to look at Mark Sears as. If Nate Oates does, keep this thing going, you're going to look back at, Mark Sears as being that one of those guys that really started it all. I mean, there's other names too, of course, but I think he's going to be probably that face of, I think you're going to get a lot of really good Alabama basketball players. I think when you start building that Mount Rushmore of players in the future, you're going to put Mark Sears on it. He's going to be on it, and he's going to be on it not only because of, obviously he's one of the best players that the programs ever have, but also his importance to the program in terms of, just coming back this year and getting them to their first Final Four and hopefully for their sake, building on that and making another run.
Yeah, I think I think you're spot on with the kind of legacy potential that it not only does for Mark Sears before this program, to look at a guy. What an amazing selling point for a coach recruiting in the transfer portal as well, considering Sears, spent a stint at Ohio and then comes in. You look at a guy like Aiden Holloway, who's young, who's joining at the same timeline in his career that Sears did. And, you look at some of these other young guys as well, and even in the future when Alabama is going to have to inevitably reload again. You not only as a fan have resounding faith that Nate Oates can do that to some pretty darn good success, but also, it's going to attract players in the portal because they see themselves, they can come in and be the next Mark Sears. And, like I said at the start too, it has yielded some NBA draft love for him. Nate Oates mentioned it. He had a workout with the Houston Rockets. He had a workout with the Milwaukee Bucks. He had other NBA workouts as well. He was at the combine. He's still creating opportunities for himself, and he'll still have another stab at it next year. Of course, without that thing looming over everyone's head that, will he or won't he anymore. But
right.
Maybe that takes some of the pressure off of him for going. I almost felt bad for him at times in the pre-draft process because everyone was just asking, hey, do you know how darn good this team's going to be if you come back? And Mark's like, why don't you ask me about my vertical? Or
I do think that played a role, though, in him coming back. I don't think, not only him, but you look at, Grant Nelson and, possibly Jaron Stevenson. And you look at, a lot of these guys might have tested the transfer, or not the transfer water, the draft waters, had Alabama not been, projected to be this good. It's a lot easier to be patient on your dream when you can fulfill another dream. And play for the nation's best roster. If this was just going to be an average basketball team, I don't think Mark comes back. I really don't. I know, he didn't necessarily have the offseason he needed to from a draft standpoint, but I still think he might take a chance at the draft if Alabama was just an average team. But you have so much to play for this season, and you look at the how fun it is going to be to be a part of this roster, that you can kind of see why some of these people made these decisions. And then, speaking to your other point too about, having another year to prove himself. I mean, he's going to be, one of the top 5 most recognizable names in college basketball, this coming season. And I think he's going to be on I think he was kind of a under the radar star last year. He kind of got snubbed for some awards. I don't think he's definitely not going to be snubbed for those awards. He's going to be on the forefront of everything, and he's going to get to play in a really big spotlight, especially if Alabama does indeed take that number one spot. So I think a lot more he's going to have a lot more chances to showcase his game. Not like he didn't do that last season, but it is going to put him on that that pedestal to kind of show out. And if he can do that again for a second season, I think you're going to have even more believers. He's got some things to prove that he won't ever be able to, he's not going to just grow 2 inches this season, but he can show that his game can work. And I think, proving that in multiple years and just being as elite as he was last year, if he can replicate that, I think it's going to prove some people, some doubters maybe wrong.
Yeah, I think with the last season stuff, like everyone has to remember, in the SEC and even nationally, he had to compete against, a guy from Tennessee named Dalton Knecht, who, if you want to talk about someone who came out of nowhere, I mean, my goodness, what he did transferring from Northern Colorado, turned himself, an older player as well into a lottery pick. I mean, it's hard not to fall a little bit out of the spotlight when everyone is just turning their attention to this, wild story of this kid, Knecht, not to heap too much praise onto him, but that did make people forget about Mark Sears. You're right. I mean, he was a second team All-American. Knecht was first. Mark Sears would have been the resounding SEC player of the year if Dalton Knecht wasn't in the league, but now you go into this year, I mean, he'll be the overwhelming favorite to win it. I think it would be nothing short of a shock if he doesn't end up winning that award. Team wise for Alabama too, I mean, yeah, it's another season of expectation. It is going to be a very different vibe than we were feeling, when we were talking last, September, October, leading up to last season, where you thought, oh, maybe tournament team, maybe they push 20 wins. Now it's, they're going to be favored in most, if not all of their conference games, depending, home or away. Like they've obviously got some big tests as a team, Tony. I think, we could just talk about the expectations.
SEC is going to be loaded, and they have a really tough non-conference schedule. So, I mean, here's another thing too. This Alabama team is going to lose next season at some point. It's not as good as it's going to be. Don't freak out when they lose their first game. It's going to happen. The SEC is stacked. I mean, look, Alabama. We should probably go into everything that Alabama has done this offseason. But Alabama has really rebuilt its team. But you look at a lot of other programs. Auburn's going to be really, really good. And in most years, you would look at the team that Auburn put together, and you'd say, man, that team's going to geez, they just won the SEC tournament. Man, that team, the look at they have coming back, that team's gonna be really good. You just look at this Alabama team; it's just a juggernaut, But there's plenty of really good teams across the conference, and then there's also some really good teams. You've got a Kansas and a Houston, and there'll be some really good teams too out there. But so it's gonna be a tough road for Alabama. It's nothing set, Don't give them the title just yet, and they are gonna have to earn it, but. It's certainly exciting.
Yeah, definitely. Also, to put into context, I think, like you said, it is very safe to say, Mark Sears will be. I think it's so hard because preseason always ends up differing so much from what happens at the end of the year. But it is easily safe to say, he will be in that top tier, that top 5, like you said, of players. I was going through just some other rosters and what they'll look like preseason. I have, I have 3 guys that I think are around Mark Sears' level, and even still, I think he probably bests all of them in terms of his importance to his team and what he's done. I look at Hunter Dickinson from Kansas, R.J. Davis from North Carolina, who of course Sears outplayed and beat in the NCAA tournament. So you have an example there. Caleb Love, another big announcement from him. He decided to come back to Arizona. I would probably put those 3 in the same category as Mark Sears in terms of value. That's probably it. Again, you have people emerge, throughout the season.
Sure, yeah.
But
I mean, you're going to have freshmen come in. You're going to have,
of course, but I think in terms of anticipation, that creates a lot of excitement for Alabama fans. You can kind of look at lists and have some fun with that. Certainly, again, don't overthink the AP poll wherever they put Alabama, but it's going to be high. No doubt about it.
Here is a okay, not to rain on the parade, Jack, but
Mhm.
is there a chance that Alabama is better, but Mark Sears doesn't have as good of a numbers year just with all the production around him, right? I mean, like if
It
you
it
add like a Chris Youngblood, Houston Millette, LeBaron Philon, Aiden Holloway, even Cliff Amore is going to, probably give you more offensive production than, you had at the post position. Grant Nelson, if he's exclusively playing the four, is going to be, probably more of an offensive threat. He'll stay out of foul trouble at least more. So like there are more people that could score that you won't necessarily. Not to say that they were super reliant on Mark because
Mhm.
they did have other options last year, but you'll be less reliant on Mark. So from a numbers standpoint, do you see him going down, but not necessarily his play, just his,
Sure.
sharing the ball maybe more? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, usage will be a very fun thing to look at next season, in terms of that metric. You're totally right, and that is one thing that is the challenge that Nate Oates has created for himself in assembling a team like this is not only do you have to manage the personalities of guys who know how good they are, whether it's these 5-star freshmen that Alabama are bringing in, or it's players like Grant Nelson and Mark Sears from last season. You not only have to manage that, but then on the court, figuring out what lineups work. This team is going to have a ton of options for who they can start. It can vary, but it's going to be able to vary by game. You figure that out, and you figure out usage. You figure out, okay, yeah, do we want to just turn to Mark? But I think the beauty of college basketball is they are going to turn to Old Reliable, I think, a lot more than people probably realize. As good as these additions are, I think there's going to be some humanizing moments when Chris Youngblood is facing down a Tennessee really good defense and says, Mark Sears, how about you take this one and you put the team on your back a little bit here. But
Also, if you have, Chris Youngblood, 40% 3-point shooter, Latrell Wrightsell, 40% 3-point shooter, it's going to be hard to double up Mark Sears anyways. You know
right.
what I'm saying? You can't really devote too much attention to him because you have, I mean, you have the potential of, and we'll get into starting lineups, but to have 40% 3-point shooters on the floor, that's crazy. Plus, two really good big men. There's just that, yeah.
Yeah, I think it's a very important thing. I keep going back to a quote Nate Oates said uh, last season where he enjoyed at times playing that 4 guard lineup. He was obviously a little bit more forced to do that with less or without having a big like he does in Omaroy, but he was clearly regretting only really having Mark Sears, Aaron Estrada, and Latrell Wrightsell as your 3 really consistent guards. I listen, Tide Illustrated, if you're on the board, this. We're big Davin Cosby Jr. fans. I think very sad to see him go, but he wasn't the most consistent guard off the bench. And I think this year he resolved that. Like you said, we've named them all already. All the options you have at guard, like that's going to create some fun lineups. You can go small, you could go extra big if you wanted with having Omaroy in, and assuming you get Jaron Stevenson back. There's all sorts
Alabama
of
was
things you can do.
prepared for Mark leaving. That's, they were
Sure.
prepared to have an elite roster without Mark Sears. So
Yeah.
now you add Mark Sears, you're not losing anybody from that roster. Yeah. You've got, probably 3 guys I feel like that could all start, for good SEC teams at the point guard position. That point guard position now with Mark Sears is, I mean, the fact that, like, I know everyone has a different starting lineup, but the fact that you could even make a case, and I kind of, I'll get into it if we need to, but like Aiden Holloway might be my 3rd string point guard. That sounds so weird to say. I think he's going to play more than what a 3rd string point guard would be. But like, yeah, that's incredible that, you have a McDonald's All-American that, played for an SEC team last year that, could, depending on how you look at things, could be a 3rd string option. That's insane. He could also be a starter though. So you know what I'm saying? Like I don't really, depending on how you slice it. But yeah, I think it's they were very prepared, and this is going to be a really deep roster with, I think you're going to see a lot of substitutions. I wonder how big the rotation will be with Nate Oates because he brought in too many people that are difference makers. It's going to be, would you say like probably like a 10-man rotation? I mean, it kind of sounds crazy to have a full 10-man rotation, but it really could be you start looking at it. It's hard to cut it down anything lower than 10.
Yeah, it's a good problem to have. I think Nate Oates will make those cuts. I don't think he'll be afraid to necessarily do that. Just because I think, especially in the postseason, you see. I mean, I look at Auburn last year. Auburn had a tremendously deep roster, and it ended up kind of biting them a little bit. I think with when it came to kind of postseason time. So I think he will trim it down. But again, like you're totally right. It's an excellent problem to have, and it's not to say that this team isn't talented enough to go 10 deep. It certainly is. I think that's a good segue, Tony. I mean, why not do it? Just for the sake of doing it. And I think we've made clear that this team, can and will probably switch up its starting five a lot more than a typical college basketball team does, just because you have, like we said, you have so much depth to go to. But if you are day one, Alabama plays Purdue tomorrow, and you, Tony, have to roll out the starting lineup. Nate Oates has got the flu. He's out. You have to
We're in
coach the
trouble.
team.
We're in trouble.
Yeah.
Maybe not so with this lineup. I don't think this lineup needs a head coach at times, but yeah.
But yeah, what lineup are you rolling out with?
To start the
if
season, let
you
me
had
make
the
this
choice?
clear because I'm really high on Darren Reed, the McDonald's All-American freshman, and I kind of feel like he will play his way into the lineup. But I don't think that when you look at the experience that Alabama has and the talent / experience that it has, I don't think you put a true freshman into your starting lineup to start the season. It's a luxury you have that you don't have to. So I will say just from the start of the season, I'll go Mark Sears, Latrell Wrightsell, and Chris Youngblood is my third guard. I think that sets you up. You have three really, really strong shooters. It's going to be impossible to guard that lineup. You've got your defense on the perimeter and Wrightsell. Youngblood's a guy that plays pretty hard too. So you're losing a little bit of size there because Youngblood, I guess, would be your three. And I think, what is he, like 6'5" or 6'4"? I don't have it in front of me, but he's not super tall. And then you don't, Mark Sears and Latrell Wrightsell aren't very tall either. So you're going with three small guards, but then you make up for it because I have Grant Nelson at the 4 and Cliff Amori at the 5. So you kind of make up for your length right there. And so you're small at the guard position, but you've got plenty of size down low. And good luck stopping that because, Grant can play from beyond the arc, or he can, he even played some small ball center. You can team him up with Cliff Amori, who's going to be one of the best rim protectors in college basketball. And I just think that you answer all your problems right there. And it's very athletic too. I mean, I think all those guys can run up and down the court. I think that gives you everything that you need from a starting lineup. Obviously, there's people that you can put in. You can sub things out. You can get bigger. You can get smaller if you want. But that's what I have.
I'm certainly not going to argue against you. I have a different lineup for the sake of having a different lineup, but I don't think you can say enough. Yeah, that sounds like a great starting lineup, Tony. I agree. I don't think that would be very easy to stop. I think you make a good point with the three guards. There's a lot of shooting on the floor. That's for sure with Youngblood offensively, with Youngblood and Wrightsell out there. I mean, let's not forget, Nate Oates has called Wrightsell at times last season the best shooter he's ever had. So, he certainly has a lot to like. And there was a recent comment I heard him make where that also gets me very excited about Chris Youngblood. I think he really values Chris Youngblood. He was kind of sticking up for him, saying this was the co-player of the year in the American Athletic Conference. He shared that honor with a guy called John L. Davis, who of course was at Florida Atlantic, went to the Final Four with that team, is now at Arkansas. So, he's no slouch. And I actually put him in my starting lineup too. I basically did a little bit of a deviation, but I did your timeline just pushed up. So I did Mark Sears, Chris Youngblood. I do have Darian Reed as a starter, and then Grant Nelson and Clifford Omeroy. I really think I am taking Wrightsell off. I think Wrightsell's value as a sixth man. I mean, obviously, it's one of the best six men you could probably have in the country. And I kind of see him as a player who wouldn't mind embracing a role like that. I think he had it to an extent last season. It worked with him in the starting lineup, but I think when you have a little bit of a bigger group now, I could see him saying, my role might be best coming off the bench, igniting, some games with my shooting, leading a second unit as a guy who's played on this team for a year and obviously just has a lot of experience in general. I don't know. I just like him as a sixth man. And Chris
I like the
Youngblood.
defense he offers, and
Mhm.
I got to see more from Youngblood, to see how much defense he offers. But I like the defense that Reitzel offers, so that's why I kept. For disclosure, when I am gonna bring in Reed later on in the season, my plan was that he probably would bump Youngblood, and so
Yeah, I mean,
you would go
he's
more defense. I mean, obviously you're going to lose some offense by bringing Reed in. You're going to gain some defense, and you're going to gain some size because he's a true shooting forward. You would then be playing with your typical 1 through 5 instead of kind of with Youngblood. You're just basically playing with 2 shooting forwards, or not shooting guards. I just think I'm really high on Reitzel. I think that he's kind of like the forgotten gem in this team. But I do like your point of that he could come off the bench. I definitely see that being a possibility for him. But I see him as a real big breakout star. There's going to be no pressure on him just with all these stars around him. And like you saw how much of an influence he had on the last year's team, just how much they struggled when he missed time with that head injury. So getting him back, I mean, he's a perfect guy at the end of the game too. That's if Nate Oates was on here, you'd hear him say the same thing. It's not the starting.
We wouldn't be
5.
talking starting lineups. It'd be the
It's
lineup out there with
5.
the last
There's a
minute.
difference between the best 5 and the starting 5, and I think at the end of the game is definitely you want a guy like Reitzel on the court because of his 3-point shooting, because of his defense on the perimeter, and also what we didn't mention was he didn't miss a single free throw, and I didn't take a lot of free throws, but still having a guy like that on the court that's just if he does have to take a foul shot or if you can funnel the ball to him, when the other team has to foul, you got a really reliable free throw shooter as well.
Yeah, I won't go on too much of a tangent about him, but I did a story where I talked to his coach at Cal State Fullerton, and he actually said, we had to have him drive to the rim so much that everyone didn't realize how good of a shooter he was. So I'm not shocked that he's getting the numbers he has, or that Nate Oates. I asked him, I said, Nate Oates said he's the best shooter ever. Like, what do you think about that? And he was like, I'm not surprised. You just didn't see him shoot at Fullerton because we had to have him do so much. So yeah, he is kind of a perfect kind of Swiss Army knife. And I agree with you. If I'm doing an end of game lineup, Latrell Reitzel is on the floor, no doubt about it.
You're probably not going to read on that end of game lineup, and nothing
right.
against him, but you're just going to want more shooting on the floor.
And you mentioned too. I mean, your starting lineup. We talked about this off air. Is 5 fifth-year seniors. I did the math. Those 5 players: Grant Nelson, Cliff Omeroy, Mark Sears, Latrell Reitzel, and Chris Youngblood. Would have a combined 481 collegiate games under their belt over their 4 years already in school. So you talk about experience.
It's a portal era, right? Like to have like that, that old of a team, or if you want to say old or experience, whatever you want to say. Like, that is that's crazy.
Yeah, and I mean, it creates a phenomenal amount of leadership for a group of really talented freshmen. I mean, Jaron Stevenson and Mohamed Diabate are still very young. Aiden Holloway is still incredibly young. And then you have Houston Mallet in there, who's a true senior too, has played 3 seasons. So a lot of leaders in that group. It's a very interesting balance. You don't have any juniors or guys that are like, maybe they'll be the guy your senior year. It's still a bunch of young guys and then a bunch of, old heads, if you will, like you said, in this lineup, as much as you can call them that. But that was my starting lineup. I love De'Aaron Reed. I don't think he's going to be in this program for very long. I think he's going to be when we get to this point in a year, we're going to be, having fun discussions about fit in the NBA for De'Aaron Reed.
I think he's going to be a guy that maybe his numbers he's going to be the guy that's going to be, if you really want to talk about Alabama making a title push and like things that are going to happen, De'Aaron Reed coming in and like maturing and being that extra boost late, maybe he hits his stride starting like February or something like that, and he just gives you that other thing that you have, like that extra shot in the arm and that extra thing for teams to worry about. If he starts hitting his stride, during the middle of a SEC season, I could see that being a huge factor for Alabama, where they're already going to be so hard to stop, and then you have guys like him that can come in You could say the same thing about like a LeBaron Philon or somebody that comes in. Even at Aiden Sherrill, we haven't talked about him. He's going to be kind of the backup for Amori at the center position. But I think with Reed, his development will be so important because he gives something different. Like I said, he plays that true shooting forward role. He can offer some above the rim athleticism, driving to the basket, but he also just plays really good defense and he gives you more size. So he gives you a lot more where you look at Philon, he's going to be a direct replacement at either the shooting guard or the point guard position, and then Cheryl is going to be more like a direct replacement for Amori at center. But like Darren Reed, kind of like you look at him and he's so projectable of like what he can do, and maybe he can add an extra wrinkle. And I think that's why his development is just going to be key. Because I think when you're preparing for Alabama, it's like there's a chance that teams could maybe figure them out a little bit and then have to refigure them out, and that's just going to be so hard.
Yeah, certainly. I think you make a lot of excellent points. I mean, it's just a lot of excitement, and there should be around this team. Obviously, like we said at the time, depending on when you're watching this, Jaron Stevenson is either in the fold or he might have kept his name in, and then even still, there's another roster spot open if he does. So another name that
And
Alabama could have there.
I mean, like, first of all, let's talk about Jaron Stevenson, because like he's a guy that probably you'd be looking at and saying this guy has talent. You saw what he did against Clemson, and you're like, well, shoot, this guy could maybe come in and like compete for a starting role. You know what I'm saying? And like he's just going to be, if he does return, he's going to see some serious minutes, but he'll be off the bench, and he'll be like a guy that you can like take Grant Nelson out and not really lose a step, hopefully, if you get that development from Jaron Stevenson. And you got to look, he had kind of an up and down season last year, but he was an early enrollee, or sorry, not an early enrollee, a reclassified freshman, so he's a year younger. I think that you're going to see if he does come back, I think you're going to see a step up. And you look at potential breakout guys, I think he's definitely one of them. He's a guy that could really better his game with another year in the college game. So I think, he's another guy, kind of like with Darren Reed, is like, man, he could add another element. I don't really know if, I don't really know if Nate Oates would go 3 forwards. That just doesn't seem like a very Nate Oatesy thing to do. But so I don't know if you could get him on the court with Grant Nelson and Cliff Amori. That just seems like just not what Alabama basketball does. But if you wanted to think of another wrinkle that you could with Stevenson, I mean, if you did really want to go small ball, or if you really did want to shoot, you could. I mean, I don't think Grant Nelson's going to play much small ball 5, but you could theoretically still play him small ball 5 and then put Stevenson at the 4. You know what I'm saying? Like, yeah, they did that at times last year, and so that just is another element if they're able to keep Stevenson.
Yeah, I think he's going to add a lot of value to this team. Assuming he does decide to come back and develop, his own game. But there's a lot to like about him. I don't I'm not necessarily surprised at the NBA hype that he's getting, because he does have a lot of upside, like Tony just said. So a lot to be excited about. We'll obviously talk, roster stuff, and it'll just build and build and build up to the season. So everyone should subscribe, and obviously we'll have a ton of content on the site as well, with basketball, with Mark Sears, all that fun stuff. So stay tuned. Any final thoughts, Tony, about Mark Sears being back, about this Alabama team possibly going to back-to-back Final Fours after reaching their first in history?
In the words of Avery Johnson, buckle up. I think that's what he said when he first came in. I think it's time to buckle up. And what a growth we've seen in this Alabama basketball team over the years. I think it really started. Not to make light of Avery Johnson there. Because he really started this move of bringing in huge players, and then just seeing that continue with Nate Oates. It's been really exciting to see the development of this program, and it's reached an all-time high. And it's just crazy that we get to be in the middle of this and cover it. I'm excited about covering this team. Excited about seeing this team on the court, because it's going to be, really fun to watch. And we're going to be lucky enough to watch, to get a firsthand view of it. And so it's weird that in the summer I'm saying I can't wait until basketball season, because normally football is on the brain right now, especially for me. I cover more football than basketball, but I am really excited about this basketball team moving forward, and it's like I can't wait for the actual season to go to get here.
Yeah, I agree. I couldn't have said it better myself. So we'll have all the coverage of it from the preseason all the way through. Hopefully another Final Four run for Mark Sears and Alabama. Until then, hope you guys enjoyed. Put some stuff in the comments about Mark Sears and be excited, because you should be. This kind of season, these kinds of rosters do not happen very often. Maybe with Nate Oates they do. I guess that's kind of the trend.
Yeah, we might be saying this again next year. Who knows?
We just might, but
we won't be saying it with this team, because it will there's too many there's too many fifth-year seniors here, so
they will have to be gone.
New roster next year for sure.
You will have to drag Mark Sears out by his cold, dead hands, unfortunately. He will not be allowed to play. But until then, we'll catch you guys next time.